Sounds like a garage tuner with a spoiler, right? Except it's older than BMW M, with its own factory and its own VIN number. Germany doesn't even classify it as a BMW. It started as a typewriter company. It became one of Germany's most respected engineering names. And after 60 years of fierce independence, it just stopped existing as its own company. This is Alpina, and a fancier BMW is the wrong way to describe it. The reluctant typewriter heir. Picture Bavaria, early 1960s. A young guy named Burkhard Bovensiepen is the son of a successful typewriter manufacturer. His dad's business made precision office machines, the kind of company where you'd expect the son to grow up, take over, and spend his life worrying about ribbon cartridges. Burkhard had other plans. He didn't care about typewriters. He cared about cars, and he just bought himself a brand new BMW 1500. Here's the thing about that BMW 1500, it was a genuinely brilliant car for its time, a sharp-handling sedan that basically saved BMW from going bankrupt. But the engine was underwhelming. 80 horsepower, one carburetor, and a young enthusiast who knew it could do better. So Bovensiepen did what any obsessive gearhead would do. He snuck into an outbuilding on his father's typewriter factory property and started tinkering. He pulled the stock Solex carburetor and replaced it with a dual Weber setup, the same style of carburetor you'd find on an Alfa Romeo at the time. The result bumped the car's output up by around 15% and knocked a few seconds off the 0 to 60 time. Not bad for a side project in a converted shed. But Bovensiepen didn't stop at his own car. He figured other BMW 1500 owners would want the same upgrade, so in 1963 he showed up to the Frankfurt Motor Show, hoping to sell his little carburetor kit. Problem was, he couldn't afford a proper booth, so instead he did something almost embarrassingly scrappy. He walked around the parking lot and tucked his brochures under the windshield wipers of every single BMW 1500 he could find. That's it. That was the marketing plan. And it worked. Those brochures sold his first 100 kits. More importantly, they caught the attention of Paul Hahnemann, BMW's head of sales at the time. Hahnemann tested the kit, liked what he saw, and did something that almost never happens in the car industry. He officially certified that installing this outside company's parts would not void the factory warranty. Think about that for a second. BMW, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world, looked at a college kid tinkering in a shed and said, "Go ahead, we trust your work enough to put our name behind it." That certification became the foundation of everything. In 1965, Bovensiepen officially founded his company. And for the name, he did something a little sentimental. He named it after his father's typewriter business, Alpina. It was a nod to the nearby Alps, and honestly, it also gave him a convenient side benefit: cheap access to branded stationery and office supplies from the family business. Practical and poetic at the same time, from tuning kits to full-blown cars. Here's where a lot of people get Alpina wrong. They assume it started as a full car company. It didn't. For its first decade or so, Alpina was strictly a parts and tuning outfit. They made carburetor kits, then crankshafts, then electronic ignition systems, then entire performance packages that dealers could bolt onto a BMW. If you wanted a factory-approved way to make your BMW faster in the 1960s, Alpina was pretty much the only game in town. And then came racing. Starting in 1968, Alpina prepared BMWs hit the track, and they started winning. Not just winning, dominating. By 1970, Alpina cars had taken the European Touring Car Championship, the German Hill Climb Championship, and the legendary Spa 24 Hours, all in the same year. This wasn't some hobbyist operation anymore. Alpina had assembled a genuinely star-studded roster of drivers, and we're talking legendary names here: Niki Lauda, James Hunt, Jackie Ickx, Derek Bell. These are Formula One and Le Mans legends, and at various points every single one of them was on Alpina's payroll, racing BMWs prepared by a company that started in a converted shed behind a typewriter factory. Racing success built Alpina's reputation, but it also built something else: engineering credibility that money couldn't buy. And by the late 1970s, the company took its biggest leap yet. In 1978, Alpina introduced the B6 2.8 based on the BMW 3 Series of the day. This wasn't just a tuning kit anymore. This was a fully realized car, built from the ground up with Alpina's own specifications, Alpina's own engineering choices, and Alpina's own identity. Most historians point to this exact car as the moment Alpina stopped being a tuner and became something closer to a manufacturer in its own right. That transformation became official in 1983. The German Federal Ministry of Transport granted Alpina full status as an automobile manufacturer, not an aftermarket modifier. And this is the detail that surprises most people when they first hear it. From that point forward, an Alpina car doesn't have a BMW VIN. It has its own unique Alpina identification number. Legally, on paper, in the eyes of the German government, an Alpina is not a BMW. It's built in close partnership with BMW, using BMW platforms and BMW engines as the starting point, but it rolls off as its own distinct vehicle, registered under its own name. Compare that to basically every other tuning company you've ever heard of, companies like Brabus with Mercedes or Hennessy here in the States. Those are aftermarket shops. They take a finished car and modify it after the fact. Alpina was recognized as something fundamentally different. A manufacturer that happened to build its cars starting from BMW components, with BMW's full knowledge and cooperation years before the car even goes on sale. The anti-M, two philosophies forged from one company. Now here's a fact that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Alpina is older than BMW's own M division. Alpina was cranking out performance parts back in 1965. BMW didn't officially form its own in-house motorsport division, the one that would eventually become the M brand we all know today, until 1972. That's 7 years later. For a while, BMW essentially had two performance arms operating in parallel, an internal one focused purely on racing glory, and an external one, Alpina, that was already building a name for itself doing things its own way. And as both companies matured, something interesting happened. Their philosophies split in almost opposite directions. BMW M's entire mission, from day one, was to bring motorsport DNA straight onto the street. Think high-revving engines, razor-sharp steering, suspension tuned for the track first, and comfort a distant second. M wanted you to feel every bit of the road. M wanted the car to feel like a race car you happened to be allowed to drive to the grocery store. Alpina went a completely different direction, and the current head of the company, Andreas Bovensiepen, Burkhard's son, has actually explained the split beautifully in interviews. Back when Alpina was souping up early BMWs like the E125 series, before BMW even had a V8 or V12 in its lineup, Alpina had to figure out how to make serious horsepower using the tools available at the time. Their answer was turbocharging, and specifically, turbocharging tuned for a massive wave of usable torque low in the rev range. Bovensiepen has described the resulting feel as something closer to a Bentley. Smooth, effortless, a huge shove of power that doesn't require you to scream the engine to redline to access it. Meanwhile, BMW M went the opposite way, chasing 4 valves per cylinder and high-revving naturally aspirated engines that needed to be worked hard to deliver their best numbers. Same starting point, the same BMW parts bin, two completely different conclusions about what makes a car exciting. That split has defined the two brands ever since. If BMW M is the sharp, aggressive espresso shot, Alpina is the perfectly aged whiskey. Both will absolutely get the job done. They just get there in completely different moods. Building an empire in silence. While all this was happening, Alpina was quietly becoming one of the most exclusive car brands on the planet, without most casual car fans ever noticing. The company stepped away from professional racing in 1988, partly due to new engine regulations that made continued competition less appealing. But by then, the racing pedigree was already locked into the brand's DNA forever. And here's something most people don't know about Alpina at all. This tiny Bavarian company that builds some of the fastest luxury sedans on Earth also happens to run one of the largest and most respected wine cellars in Germany. Seriously. Burkhard Bovensiepen developed a genuine passion for fine wine alongside his passion for fast cars, and Alpina built out a wine distribution business that, over the decades, grew into a serious operation with a cellar holding well over 1 million bottles. To this day, Alpina is almost as well known in parts of Germany for its wine as it is for its cars. It's a strange little footnote, but it tells you everything about the kind of company this was. Understated, a little eccentric, obsessed with getting the finest things in life exactly right, whether that's a bottle of Bordeaux or a twin-turbo V8. And the numbers tell the Exclusivity story on their own. At its peak, Alpina was producing somewhere around 1,700 to 2,000 cars a year, worldwide. For comparison, that's a rounding error for BMW, which builds well over 2 million vehicles annually. Alpina has always been rarer than Rolls-Royce, rarer than Bentley, a company that, for most of its existence, remained family-run, right down to Burkhard's son Andreas eventually taking over leadership. If you can spot the difference between a hardcore track weapon and a luxury grand tourer, and you're enjoying peeling back the curtain on the badges you see every single day but never really understood, do me a favor real quick. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me which car brand's origin story you want us to dig into next. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss it when we post. It genuinely makes a massive difference for this channel. All right, let's get back into it, because we still haven't answered the biggest question of this entire video. What actually makes an Alpina different under the skin? So if an Alpina starts life as a BMW, uses BMW's platform, and is even sold at BMW dealerships, what exactly are you paying for? Let's break it down, piece by piece, because the differences run a lot deeper than a badge and a paint job. Start with the engines. Alpina takes BMW's own engine as a foundation, then rebuilds it with its own turbochargers, its own cooling systems, and its own engine calibration, all done largely by hand at the Alpina facility in Buchloe, Germany. The result almost always favors torque over peak horsepower. Take the Alpina B5 versus the BMW M5 from a few years back. Both use the same basic 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, both made around 600 horsepower. But the Alpina made noticeably more torque, 590 pound-feet, compared to the M5's 553. The M5 was quicker to 60, but the Alpina had that broader, more linear surge of power that makes it feel almost effortless at any speed rather than needing to be revved out to access its full potential. Multiply that pattern across nearly every model comparison, the B7 against the M760i, the B8 against the M8, and you'll see the same story repeat. Alpina chasing usable, everyday torque. BMW M chasing peak, high RPM output. Then there's the chassis. Alpina models often get their own specific suspension tuning, engineered for a smoother, more composed ride over broken pavement, without giving up serious cornering grip. Some Alpina models even get four-wheel steering that you won't find on the equivalent M car. The goal isn't to be the sharpest scalpel on a track day. It's to be composed at 150 miles an hour on the Autobahn, while your coffee doesn't spill in the cup holder. Visually, Alpina has its own unmistakable signature. The most obvious one is the wheels, Alpina's iconic 20-spoke alloy design that's been a hallmark of the brand for decades. Then there are two paint colors reserved exclusively for Alpina and not available on any regular BMW, Alpina Blue Metallic and Alpina Green Metallic. Longtime enthusiasts can spot those two colors from a block away and know exactly what they're looking at. Add in Alpina's classic pinstripe deco set, a callback to the company's 1970s racing liveries, plus unique front spoilers, badge work, and trim, and you end up with a car that looks related to its BMW donor car, but unmistakably its own thing. Step inside, and the differences keep going. Alpina interiors typically feature more premium leather choices, unique stitching patterns, hand-finished wood trim, and Alpina-specific gauge clusters and badging you simply cannot option onto a standard BMW, no matter how much money you throw at the configurator. Every detail exists to remind you, the second you sit down, that you're in something different from the car parked next to it at the dealership. And here's the philosophy that ties it all together, and it comes straight from the current CEO himself. The comparison people love to make is BMW M builds the best track car you can drive on the street. Alpina builds the best road car you can occasionally drive very, very fast. M wants total driver engagement in every situation. Alpina wants effortless, composed, borderline luxurious speed that never asks you to work for it. Neither one is objectively better. They're just built for two completely different definitions of what a fast car should feel like. The end of an era. For nearly 60 years, that arrangement worked beautifully. Alpina operated as its own independent company, closely partnered with BMW but never owned by it, cranking out a few thousand cars a year for a small, devoted, and very wealthy customer base. But in 2022, that changed. BMW announced it would acquire the Alpina brand outright, with full production and operational integration planned in the years following. This wasn't some hostile takeover or a company going bankrupt. According to reporting on the deal, the Bovin-Siepen family's decision to sell was driven mostly by regulation, not by a lack of demand. Building cars in the modern era means dealing with increasingly complex EU emissions rules, evolving safety standards, and software requirements that keep getting more expensive and more difficult for a tiny, low-volume manufacturer to keep up with on its own. Every new generation of car required deeper integration with BMW's own systems, longer development timelines, and higher certification costs, all while Alpina's profit margins kept getting squeezed. Add the massive engineering lift required by electrification, and staying fully independent simply stopped making financial sense for a company this size. So the family made the call. Rather than watch Alpina slowly get squeezed out of existence, trying to compete with regulatory demands built for giant automakers, they sold the brand to the company they'd been closely partnered with for 60 years anyway. The transition has been gradual. Production has been shifting more directly under BMW's umbrella, and the company was officially renamed BMW Alpina. Andreas Bovin-Siepen, the founder's son, has stayed on, now focused on the vehicle development side, along with service, parts, and accessories, rather than running an independent manufacturer the way his father once did. For longtime enthusiasts, that transition felt bittersweet. This was a brand that had spent 60 years being fiercely, almost stubbornly independent, and it fought hard to earn that official manufacturer status back in 1983. Watching it fold into BMW directly feels like the end of a very specific kind of automotive story. The scrappy outside specialist finally getting fully absorbed by the giant it always worked alongside. At the same time, most industry watchers see this as the only realistic path forward. BMW folding Alpina closer into its own production lines likely means more consistent build quality, potentially higher production volumes, and continued survival of a name that might otherwise have quietly withered under the sheer cost of modern car manufacturing. Coming full circle. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Alpina is older than BMW's own M division. For decades, it wasn't legally considered a BMW at all. It had its own VIN, its own manufacturer status, its own identity, built by a family that also happened to run one of the finest wine cellars in the country. It chased a completely different definition of performance than M did. Torque over peak horsepower, comfort over raw aggression, effortless speed over track day sharpness. And in some very real, very measurable ways, an Alpina could out-torque, out-cruise, and sometimes even out-top speed the very M cars that BMW built specifically to be its fastest machines. That's not a knockoff. That's not BMW, but fancier. That's an entirely different school of thought on what a great performance car should feel like, one that earned its own respect the hard way through racetracks, through engineering, and through 60 years of doing things its own stubborn, meticulous way. And now, after all that, the story has folded back into BMW itself. Not through failure, but through a family deciding that the honest, practical path forward meant finally letting go of full independence. It's a quieter ending than most car stories get. No dramatic collapse, no scandal. Just 60 years of craftsmanship finding a new home inside the very company it grew up alongside. And that's the wild, understated story of Alpina. From a converted shed behind a typewriter factory, to brochures tucked under windshield wipers in a parking lot, to Formula One legends racing under the Alpina banner, to a legally recognized car manufacturer that somehow also runs a million-bottle wine cellar, and finally, to folding into the very brand it spent 60 years standing right alongside. If you learned something new today, that is exactly why this channel exists. We love digging into the stories hiding behind the badges you drive past every single day, the engineering decisions, the family history, the weird little details that never make it into a spec sheet. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot more of these breakdowns coming your way, and you genuinely don't want to miss them. Drop a comment down below and let me know. Are you an M person, or does the Alpina philosophy speak to you more? I read every single comment, and I love seeing where everybody lands on this one. And if you want to keep going deeper into this world, go check out our video on Maybach right after this. It's a completely different luxury story, but it pairs perfectly with everything we just talked about here. Thanks for riding along with me on this one. I'll see you in the next video.